because most of us are from China. And in the past 2 days, we have been in Newcastle. So he will bring us to explore more about China's historic link to Newcastle. I think that will be very, very interesting. Angelo 是建筑和城市规划学院的高级讲师，他已经在纽卡斯尔大学任教有18年，18 years, right? Yeah. And 他的主要的研究领域是社会学，然后呢，探讨的包括的是非物质文化遗产，包括城市的建筑保护、历史的这个视角等等。所以呢，他也在中国做过很多的这个关于中国建筑的遗址的这些研究。那所以呢，他也去探讨，因为他是2022年开始担任外方院长。所以呢，他也对这个纽卡跟中国的这个从历史上的一些 link 非常有感兴趣，所以今天我们请他来，他一直对孔院的工作非常的支持。我们经常说 ，we always say we are the best team。所以呢，欢迎这个 Dr. Angelo, please, yeah.
Hello. Is this on?
You can use it.
So is it working? Can you hear me?
You can use this one.
Yeah, I can't hear anything coming out of it. Is it the battery?
This one's
Thanks, mate. Okay, that's more like it. Very good. So hello, good afternoon. Is it an afternoon? Yes, it is. So thanks to Professor Jiang Ruojuan for a brief introduction. Loosely speaking, I am an academic where history and sociology meet. And I've spent a lot of my career looking at, really, if I'm honest with you, the use and abuse of history. I started out looking at, also I look at things like golden ages and the way governments use golden ages. Just to say, my long-term interest has actually been in something called national narratives. And what national narratives are stories that governments and people tell themselves. So you have a golden age in this national narrative, a period of decline,
this age now,
a period of struggle, and then a period where you say, let's rejuvenate the nation, make China great again, make America great again.
Newcastle great again.
Make Newcastle great again. But often I'm interested, so during my career, I've done a lot of that really, but that almost like a sociological problem, this sort of period of golden ages, decline, struggle, rejuvenation. And I look at the way governments and people, not just governments, but also people. I did a very large project in China on the Han Fu movement. I published a lot on that. And one of their main ideas is that China is seen as a period of decline, and they are there to revive China with etiquette, good taste, and they don't like tu hao, nouveau riche. So this is the kinds of things I've done with my career. I've spent the last 18 years studying the way in which people interpret the past. So anyway, this is a story, my interpretation of the past, so it might be an abuse of history, but you can tell me yourself whether I've abused local history. But this is just a basic historical sociology lecture. So we'll start from this point, and this tells us, this is really the entry point into our story today. And as you know, China, particularly in the 19th century, went through a period of decline. That depends who you talk to, of course. There are different historians have different perspectives. By the way, I love this. This is something that the right-wing press would crucify me for in Britain, for showing you this image, but I love it. It's actually a satirical image. And this is, it was a French image, and you can find it in, I think, in the British Museum today. But this is supposed to represent a British guy saying, you need this opium. Because if you don't take it, we'll have nothing for our beef steaks. Okay. So anyway, I've written something recently on why Britain forgot the Opium War. That's another thing we'll talk about, another lecture. Anyway, during this period, the Qing dynasty, you know, particularly in the 1860s and 19th century, there's attempt to move towards what we call a self-strengthening movement. And this is, of course, later called the Westernization movement, which involved learning from Western science and technology, and particularly, obviously, colonialism had weakened China, particularly not just opium, but other forms of colonialism as well. But this is a symbol of it. Oops. And well, it was against this background anyway that a fleet was established as the Beiyang fleet in Qing dynasty China. And this was China's first modern naval force. And particularly what the Beiyang government was interested in was particularly gunboats and cruisers. Does this work, by the way? I think it does. No, it doesn't. All right, I'll just say change slide then. So yeah, you know, they were after, quite simply, the best military naval might that the world could offer. And China often went to, or the Beiyang government went to, the Qing government, I should say, went to Britain and Germany. Because at the time, these nations were leading military thinking and manufacturing. Next. So here we get to Newcastle, and this is Lord Armstrong, okay? The Armstrong Whitworth Company is famous, of course, and you probably learned quite a bit about him, I suppose. It was a major British manufacturing company.
Strong building.
Yeah, that's right. You're in the Armstrong building now. Yeah, so we're actually remembering him by being in this building now. He had HQ or headquarters in Elsick, and he was involved in really armaments, so weapons, ships, locomotives, automobiles, and aircraft. One thing's for certain is that he was certainly an industrialist, and in some ways you could say quite a hard businessman, because it seems that he sold weapons to just about everybody who would buy them, including the Japanese. And the Japanese are part of our story today, as you can imagine, all right? So next, please. So anyway, he, during the 19th century anyway, 7 cruisers were designed and built for the Beiyang fleet by the Armstrong Whitworth Company. And I'm going to tell you the story of some of these cruisers. Some of them didn't last long, but they were built here in Newcastle anyway. So the first one is Zhe Yuan, launched in September 1886. Jing Yuan, launched in December 1886. Fei Ting, launched 1890. Fu An, which is the gunboat, really. I don't have many records on this, but I've done quite a lot of pottering around in the library to give you this lecture. We don't have much on that. Hai Tian, which was launched on the 25th of November, 1897. Hai Che, launched the 24th of January, and the Chao Ho, launched 23rd of October, 1911. Now, the ones in red, we're going to look at the stories of these cruisers. Next, please. All right, so this is the first image dug from the archives here in Newcastle, and it's amazing. You can see British and Chinese people together around. This is a image, again, I should imagine around 1894. Have a note there, you can see a dragon on the front of the cruiser. So this is a Jie Yuan, and it's described as Chi Yuan, obviously in Wade Giles. So obviously you're the language conference who know more about this distinction between Pinyin and Wade Giles than me. So it was ready for launch at Armstrong's Mitchell Yard on the 29th of September, 1886. Unfortunately, it was sunk on the 17th of September at the Battle of the Yalu River by an Imperial Japanese cruiser. And that Japanese cruiser was built in the same damn yard. Yes, what an absolute pest. Anyway, have a look at this image. So you can be a little bit cynical about Mr. Armstrong, Lord Armstrong, because indeed, he would sell anything to anyone. So anyway, have a look at this image, and we can see Brits here, Geordies, no doubt, and our Chinese ship workers who are here to help build the ships. Next. And this is a Ji Yuan in 1886. So very good, doing battle. Next. There's two more ships. Sorry, the same ship. This is Jing Yuan, December 1886. Just to give you a sense of what they look like. Next. All right, that takes us to the Haiche, which was made ready for launch on the 24th of January. And again, this was at the Low Walker Yard, part of one of William Armstrong's yards. In the photo, and I'll show you a closer up of the image in a minute, you can see Chinese dignitaries in traditional costume. And there's also a pagoda structure with paper lanterns. So have a look, a little pagoda structure. That's it. But there, have a look at that. So that's the 19th century. And this really is our first Newcastle Chinese encounters. So it's marvelous, really. I'm glad to have found these pictures. I think I might have this one blown up and put on my wall at home. Because I think it's quite good. My wife, would Tai Tai Shandong Ren. She's familiar with this. Okay, next, that's it. So anyway, Haiche was the largest Chinese warship at the time of her completion, so pretty impressive in terms of size. She embarked on a world cruise and became the first Chinese warship to enter American waters. That's something the Americans would like, wasn't it, really? Especially if Trump gets in. Okay, next. The Imperial Chinese cruiser, the Chao Ho, again launched on the 23rd of October at the Elsick shipyard. Again, it was built by Armstrong Whitworth Company and was completed in 1912. Again, another sorry story. The ship was wrecked on the 28th of September 1937 following attack by 4 Japanese warships near Guangxi. And apparently it was beached after Japanese plane attacks. So this is a sad story, I know, but let's continue. Anyway, let's look at that. That's the Chao Ho here on the Tyne, I gather, from Elsick. Next. All right, now this takes us to heritage. What can we find of these early encounters between China and Newcastle? Okay. Now, if you go to St. John's Cemetery in Elsick today, you might have come across 5 intriguing headstones written in Chinese Mandarin characters, which you can decipher for yourselves, because this is the language conference. This one's the right date to 1881 and is dedicated to a sailor who died of TB on board a transport ship after he arrived at Elsick. So as far as I understand, he was ill before he got here with TB. But nevertheless, in a way, he's part of this encounter heritage. Next. And there's 5 graves in total, as you can look in Elsick today. Next. And so we now know, after lots of local study, the graves contain the remains of Yuan Peifu, Gu Shizhong, Lian Jin Yuan, Chen Shoufu, and Chen, this one's hard for me, Chen Kui? Chen Che Kui. God, that one's hard for me. Forgive me. I've passed HSK 2. Yeah, I know. I'm going on to HSK 3. You know, I'm probably a little bit above tourist level, but I've still got a way to go. Anyway, have a look at this. So experts consider the tombs to be historical artifacts that mark the birth of the Beiyang fleet. And again, Chinese people today in the UK are quite proud of this. Again, it's part of that attempt at strength in the face of adversity against particularly Japanese incursions, the Japanese wars. So these places are sacred in many ways. They're marks of history, but sacred to the Chinese community. Next. So the graves, anyway, were restored, and it was funded by the China Foundation for Cultural Heritage Conservation. And we're proud to say that all these graves were restored between 2018. I think it was in the winter of 2018. So that's why you've got 2018, 2019. What does it say? The plaque commemorates the restoration of memorials to the 5 sailors of the Imperial Chinese Navy. Very good. Actually, just to tell you something, if you go to the graves, you often find round about Chinese New Year, Chinese students come and leave offerings and things like that. Now, my wife and I and my son have done that too. Okay, next. All right, now here's something else. This is a controversial story. I can't ascertain whether it's true or not, but I've got a feeling it bloody well is. Forgive my language, but there you go. And so I have a mate called Shuifeng Wang. He's at XJLTU, Xi'an Jiaotong Liverpool University. He spent a long time in Newcastle in the Centre for Urban Regional Development Studies. We call it CURDS. And he did quite a lot of local history, and he's told me this story. I can't verify it, but I've got a feeling it's probably true. So he said that actually the relationship between the Qing government and Armstrong was controversial. And he said that he's Chinese as well. He said he thinks that the Chinese were too naive and the Japanese were not. And this is why there were problems. So what Shuifeng told me is Armstrong told the Chinese government to bring 180 soldiers, 30 soldiers for each ship. And apparently it was 6 ships, but of course there was a gunboat. Yeah, but let's just move that aside. And he said, Armstrong said, no engineers, no engineers. And we think that Armstrong was worried about IP, intellectual property, right? Yeah. And so apparently the Qing government did as they were told very gracefully, said, yep, we'll send soldiers, no engineers. However, Armstrong asked the Japanese to do the same thing, and the Japanese sent engineers in disguise. Ah, there you go. That's all is fair in love and war. That's what we say, right? All is fair in love and war. Very, very. So this is the Japanese battleship, nevertheless, that Armstrong built, and you can see it running down the Tyne River. Okay, next. All right, so that's the first encounter, which was the 19th century. Am I okay to carry on? Have I got plenty of time?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Is it interesting? Yeah, it's not
Depends on-
uliao, not boring.
No.
Usually history is wow, 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 wow. No? Okay, good, good. That's all right then. So anyway, that's the first Chinese Newcastle encounter. All right. We've got another encounter in the 1940s, yes. And the first Chinese restaurant in Newcastle was the Marlborough Cafe on Scotswood Road, which opened its doors in 1949. And at this time, the Chinese population in Newcastle was about 30. Right, so not many people at all. Now, by the 1960s, another 14 restaurants came into existence, including the May Quay in Northumberland Street, but none on Stowell Street. And Stowell Street, as you'll know, is a modern location of Chinatown in Newcastle, right? Yeah. So Stowell Street was relatively empty. Next, please. So in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Chinese people started to emigrate to the UK, mostly from Hong Kong. Now, the first place they came really was through Liverpool, and we'll talk about Liverpool in a minute, or Liverpool, if you're familiar with Liverpool, that's how you speak it. I was in a church in Liverpool once, and the church warden said, we're going to take a look at the Book of St. Luke. There you go. So that's very good, isn't it? So anyway, there was much poverty in HK at the time. So Chinese people came to Britain for a new way of life. Next. Now, just to tell you something interesting, there is a famous film, which is fabulous. It's called The End of the Sixth Happiness. And that's Ingrid Bergman, who's a famous Swedish actress. And I watched this film years ago because actually my old boss, John Pendlebury, he was a relative of Gladys Aylward. Now, the story is about Gladys Aylward. She was a missionary who was from the Northwest, lived in China during the conflicts, you know, from the 30s to basically to the 40s. And she basically helped orphans, children. She was good news, basically. I think she probably left just before Mao got in 49. But nevertheless, anyway, what's interesting about the film is that when I watched it, I thought that doesn't look like China. You know, it's actually set mainly in Wales. Okay, so this is what's great about the film. And actually, all the local actors were taken from the Liverpool Chinatown. Okay, so that's why it feels convincing, and it's a lovely film. Actually, you should watch it. I do recommend it. And basically, she's definitely in a way a long lost daughter of China and a supporter of Chinese people during the terrible conflict with Japan. Yeah. But she did try, I mean, she was trying to push Christianity, of course, and I'm not religious, but on the other hand, she did a lot for the poorest. So that's just to tell you the connection to Liverpool, Chinatown. Next. Anyway, back to Newcastle. So really the story of Chinatown is actually attached to this gentleman. This is Peter Cheng. He's an influential businessman. He's known as Mr. Style Street. He arrived in England from Hong Kong in the early 1960s, and he worked as a waiter and just a general pot washer. Yes, kind of thing I used to do in pubs when I was younger as a student, you know, pot washed. And there was a landmark occasion, 75, for Peter Cheng as he opened his Chinese supermarket on the Westgate Road. And I understand this was the first supermarket. Next. And then a few years after the opening of the supermarket, Mr. Cheng opened the first business in Style Street, 1978, which of course is the centre of Newcastle's Chinatown. And following Peter's lead, more Chinese businesses came to the street and momentum grew. In the 80s came the Jade Garden, the Ming Dynasty, the Mandarin and the King Neptune. So, you know, these are the restaurants there. I still quite like Infusion though, which isn't in Style Street, but anyway, there you go, that's my problem. And things have taken off. These developments were helped in 1979 by the founding of the Northeast China Association, NECA, and it's still very successful. You know, it's a non-profit cultural educational institution dedicated to deepening and understanding the appreciation of Chinese culture, kind of like the Confucius Institute. And they offer free services, often aimed at the local Chinese community. Next. If I've understood correctly, they often provide, as I'm saying here, provide food for local elderly Chinese people with traditional Chinese meals every Tuesday. So they've been holding regular events at Community Centre since 1991, and I think they're running strong. They got a lot of support from Newcastle City Council, and they've actually been given property. So the Chinese Activity Centre or Community Centre, which you can see today, is actually government provided, government sponsored. So it's a good thing. It's basically an anchor. Yes, it's a good home for Chinese identity. Next. You can also see this, obviously, if you enter Chinatown, you can see this 11-meter high arch. This was built in Shanghai, believe it or not, in 2004. And it was funded again by the city council, a quango called One Northeast, which the Conservative government, I'm sorry, I don't miss them, tried to get rid of the quango. In fact, they did get rid of the quango. Quango means quasi-autonomous non-governmental organization. And the Conservative government, Yopai, right wing, they tried to get rid of things like that. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. We need the trickle-down effect, you know. So, which is a shame because they were, to my opinion, they were very good and they supported good things like this. The gate was erected on St. Andrew's Street and is flanked by 2 Chinese guardian lions and faces St. James's Park. Maybe the lions can encourage the magpies to play better. Next. Right, so today the Chinese community is around 20,000, and at its heart is Style Street in Newcastle. It must be said that on the coast where I live in Cullercoats, there's also a growing Cantonese community on the coast as well. So even if the centre of town has this lively community, there's also a big Chinese diaspora on the coast as well. Yeah, so there's more people than just 20,000. Style Street boasts collections of restaurants, supermarkets, etc. And there's even town planning permission. In 1988, business along Style Street were allowed to have signs in Chinese as well as English. And there was a part of a master plan to actually develop the centre. So town planning's been involved. And just finally, just to say, every year when Chinese New Year is happening here, the street really hosts the core of the celebrations. So really, it's an important card for the city. It's important to the Chinese community, and it's important to everything we're doing here today as well. Next. Okay, that's it. Do you have any, is there any questions or anything?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for me?
你
Not sure.
可以在会后再跟我们 Andy 讨论哈，因为是不是时间有限 ？Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah，我要推荐的是 Armstrong Building， 在离这附近也1个多小时的路程，有一个 West Side 是 Armstrong 的这个庄园，非常漂亮，大家有时间也可以去参观。好，那我们再次感谢 Andy，Thank you. It's so